Under the blistering sun of a late summer day in 1865, the prairie stretched endless and unforgiving. The air shimmered above the scorched earth, and the dry grass rattled like brittle bones in the faint wind. A woman staggered along a dirt trail, a limp child draped across her hip, while three others trudged behind her, their tiny feet dragging, eyes hollow, belly shrunken. Her name was Clara May. Though at that moment she felt less a person and more a ghost of desperation, a shadow held upright by sheer will. It had been 5 days since the children had eaten. They had shared the last heel of bread until it turned to crumbs in their palms, washed it down with muddy creek water that had soured her stomach. She had prayed for luck, for mercy, for some stranger's hand to stretch across the wilderness. But luck in the frontier country was a word whispered into dust. Her youngest whimpered faintly against her shoulder. His breath was shallow, hot against her skin, yet his body chilled as though the life was leaving him. Clara's throat tightened. She could not bury another child. She would not. Her husband had already been lowered into the earth 2 months back, a man who promised her he could carve a farm out of the prairie but left her with debts, a collapsed roof, and 4 mouths gnawing on hunger. The trail rose and curved, and when she lifted her eyes from the dirt, she saw it at last. A ranch, sturdy and sprawling against the horizon. Fences stretched wide, cattle dotted the grassland beyond, and smoke rose steady from a chimney. Clara nearly fell to her knees with relief. Civilization. Shelter. Perhaps salvation. Her eldest boy, Samuel, barely 10, looked at her with cracked lips. "Mama, can we stop?" His voice rasped like gravel. "We're almost there," she whispered, though her legs trembled beneath her. "Hold on a little longer." She clutched the child tighter against her hip, pressed forward with the last of her strength. Each step carried her closer to the tall wooden gate that marked the entrance. Inside the yard, men paused in their work. Ranch hands leaned on fence posts, pitchforks in hand, wary eyes tracking the stranger with the ragged dress and brood of half-starved children. Clara stumbled, then dropped to her knees just short of the gate. Dust rose around her, and the child in her arms let out a weak cry. A tall man stepped from the shade of the porch. Broad-shouldered, weathered by war and work, his face was carved with years of hardship. He moved with the steadiness of someone who had carried more burdens than he cared to count. His name was Jeb Carter, and his reputation in town was as firm and unyielding as the ranch that bore his name. "What in God's name?" one of the ranch hands muttered, glancing toward his boss. "She's half dead, Mr. Carter." Jeb stopped before her, his shadow cutting across her face. Clara lifted her head, hair clinging to her sweaty cheeks, and her eyes wide, desperate, shining with unshed tears, locked on his. "My children," her voice cracked, hoarse as if she hadn't spoken in days. "They haven't eaten in 5 days." The men shifted uneasily, but Jeb's expression remained unreadable, carved from stone. Clara drew a ragged breath, the words falling from her as if they weighed 1,000 pounds. "I'll be yours forever if you feed them." The yard fell silent. Not even the wind dared to move. The ranch hands exchanged looks, some with pity, some with suspicion. One spat into the dirt, muttering, "Sounds like trouble." Jeb's jaw tightened. He remembered hunger, the gnawing emptiness from his soldier days, when men chewed leather to trick their bodies into thinking they'd eaten. He remembered comrades wasting away in the mud, eyes glazed and mouths foaming, their last words lost to starvation. And now here was this woman, thin as a reed, trembling but defiant, offering herself in exchange for her children's lives. He looked down at the boy clinging to her skirts, the girl leaning on her brother, the infant limp in her arms. Hunger's toll was written plain. They would not survive another day without help. Jeb shifted his gaze back to Clara. "Stand up." His voice was low, commanding, though not unkind. Her legs failed her, and she nearly toppled, but Samuel helped pull her upright. Dust streaked her face, and still she did not let go of the child in her arms. "Bring them water," Jeb said to his men. "Bread. Stew. Whatever's left in the kitchen." The hands hesitated, as though questioning if this was wise. Jeb's glare cut sharp. Now, they moved. In moments, buckets were fetched, bread torn, bowls filled. Clara's children fell upon the food like wild creatures, cramming bites into their mouths, choking and gulping. Clara tried to slow them, to remind them not to eat too fast, but she was shaking too badly to keep order. She sank against the gatepost, eyes closing, relief washing through her in a wave so powerful it made her dizzy. For the first time in days, the children were eating. Jeb stood nearby, arms folded, watching her. She could feel the weight of his gaze, the unspoken judgment in it. Her shame rose hot. She had promised herself she would never beg, never fall so low as to trade dignity for bread. Yet here she was, the words still echoing in the air, "I'll be yours forever." When her breathing steadied, she looked at him again. "You didn't answer me," she whispered, voice raw. "I said I'd be yours if you'd feed them." The men nearby shifted, some smirking, some looking away in discomfort. Jeb's eyes darkened, unreadable, but his voice carried no mockery. "You don't owe me your body for bread, ma'am." Her face flushed, tears threatening. "Then why? Why would you?" "Because they'd have died otherwise," he said simply. The words struck her like a blow. Kindness was rarer than gold in the frontier, and here it came from a man rumored to be as cold as winter stone. She lowered her gaze, unable to hold his eyes any longer. The ranch hands brought more food, more water. The children ate until their bellies bulged and their exhaustion dragged them into sleep, curled in the shade of the porch. Clara sat with them, smoothing hair from foreheads, kissing dirty cheeks, whispering thanks she barely understood herself. Jeb lingered nearby, watching. His own memories stirred, his wife's face pale and lifeless after childbirth. The child that never took a first breath, the nights alone with only whiskey and cattle for company. He had built his ranch strong to keep the world out. And yet, when he looked at Clara, he saw eyes that mirrored his own grief, a pain carved deep but borne for the sake of others. Night drew near. The prairie sky bled crimson, shadows stretching long. A rider galloped up, dust trailing behind, urgency in every stride. He dismounted, breathless. "Boss," he said to Jeb, "Pike's gang was spotted not 3 miles east. They're circling homesteads. Folks say they're looking for easy pickings." A murmur ran through the men. Clara stiffened, arms tightening around her youngest. She knew the stories, drifters who took what they pleased, who left ruin behind. Jeb's face hardened. "Double a watch. Lock the cattle in tight. No man leaves the ranch alone." The rider nodded and hurried off. Jeb's gaze shifted back to Clara. She sat silent, fear flickering in her eyes. She had walked into a world no safer than the hunger she fled. "You can stay here tonight," he said finally, voice low but steady. "You and the young uns. Safe and out there." Clara swallowed, nodding faintly. Her throat felt raw, her heart torn between relief and dread. As the stars crept across the sky, Clara lay beside her children in a borrowed cot, listening to the creak of wood and the distant murmur of men keeping watch. The prairie wind whistled faintly through the cracks, carrying scents of smoke, leather, and horses. She should have slept, but every time she closed her eyes, she heard her own voice again. "I'll be yours forever if you feed them." What had she promised? What had she given away in her desperation? And what kind of man was Jeb Carter, hard rancher, war veteran, widower, who had chosen to help her when he could have turned her aside? Jeb sat alone by the fire in the main room, whiskey untouched in his hand, staring into the flames. He should have sent her on her way. Another mouth to feed, for children besides, all in a land that swallowed the weak whole. Yet something in her eyes had stayed his hand, a strength buried beneath the hunger, a plea that reached a place in him he thought long dead. Outside, a coyote howled. The men muttered by the gate, rifles resting against shoulders, eyes scanning the dark horizon for torches, for the faint glint of steel. Trouble was near. Jeb could feel it in his bones. And in the stillness of that night, both Clara and Jeb knew that hunger was not the only danger waiting for them on the frontier. Something darker, sharper, was coming their way. Dawn spread pale light over the prairie, gilding the tops of the grass with silver and chasing away the long shadows of night. The Carter ranch stirred with the sounds of a new day, hooves striking hard earth, roosters crowing, the low murmur of men beginning their labor. Clara May rose from the cot where she had lain with her children, every bone aching, though her heart beat steadier than it had in weeks. The children still slept, curled against one another, bellies no longer caved in but rounded with the blessed weight of food. For that alone she whispered a prayer of thanks. She stepped outside into the morning chill, her borrowed shawl tight around her shoulders. Jeb Carter was already awake, as if he never truly slept, standing near the corral with a saddle slung over one shoulder. He glanced her way but said nothing, his eyes sharp as ever, measuring the horizon. The man carried silence like armor, and she did not yet know if it had kindness or danger. The ranch hands watched her, too, some with curiosity, others with suspicion, as though she were an intruder who might bring ruin with her. She ignored their stares, straightened her spine, and asked the cook where she could help. The man grunted, shoving a basket of laundry into her arms. She bent to the work without complaint, knowing each small act earned the roof over her children's heads. By midday, Clara's eldest, Samuel, was helping stack wood, his small frame straining but determined. Her girls carried water from the pump, laughing weakly when they splashed one another, their strength slowly returning. The youngest, still too frail to stand long, lay bundled near the fire where a ranch hand's wife watched him with a mother's eye. For the first time in weeks, Clara felt the faint pulse of hope. Yet hope in the frontier was as fragile as spun glass. That afternoon, as Clara scrubbed shirts at the washboard, two ranch hands lingered nearby, their voices carrying over the churn of water. "She's a burden, is what she is," one muttered. "Four mouths, and for what?" "Carter's too soft, letting her stay." "She offered herself to him, you didn't hear?" The other whispered, spitting into the dirt. "A woman who'd trade her body for bread. Ain't the kind that belongs here." Clara's hands froze in the suds. Heat rushed to her cheeks, shame twisting in her chest. She turned, about to speak, when a shadow fell across them. Jeb stood behind the man, silent until they shifted uncomfortably under his stare. "You speak again of her in that manner," Jeb said, his voice low and steady, "and you'll find your pay docked, your horse unsaddled, and your boots pointed to the road." The men muttered apologies and slunk away. Clara lowered her gaze, trembling with a mix of gratitude and mortification. Jeb lingered only a moment longer, then walked on without a word, leaving her to scrub the shame from fabric that could never be fully clean. That evening he rode into town for supplies. Clara busied herself with mending, but her heart twisted as the sun dipped lower. Town meant people, people meant talk, and talk meant her desperate plea might spread on every wind. She prayed he would keep it to himself. He returned at dusk, his horse lathered with sweat and with news that chilled her blood. Ezekiel Pike's gang had been sighted again, closer this time. 6 men, rough from the war and hardened by cruelty, riding under a banner of hunger and bloodlust. They had raided homesteads on the edge of town, stealing cattle, grain, even children's shoes. The sheriff called them wolves among lambs, and now the wolves were circling nearer. Clara sat by the fire, her children pressed against her, listening as Jeb told his men to be ready. His voice was calm, almost too calm, like a man who had lived too long with the scent of danger. Later, when the children slept, Clara found herself alone with him near the dying embers. She dared to ask, "Do you know this Pike?" Jeb's eyes flickered with a darkness she had not seen before. "I know him," he said, his voice gravel. "We fought together in the war. He was a man who learned to live on blood. Some men leave war behind. Others carry it with them. Pike carries it still." The fire crackled between them, shadows leaping against the walls. Clara studied him, quietly, the rigid line of his jaw, the scars etched deep. For the first time she wondered if he too carried the war inside, if the silence he wore was born of wounds no one could see. The days that followed were tense, the air itself charged as though waiting for storm. Clara tried to prove her worth with every step, tending the kitchen, patching shirts, stitching torn saddles, gathering eggs. She knew the ranch hands still doubted her, but when a wolf crept too near one evening, snapping at the corral, she did not wait for a man to come running. She seized a rifle, her hands trembling, and fired. The shot rang true, and the wolf crumpled in the dust. The men rushed out at the sound, but it was Jeb who took the rifle from her hands. She expected rebuke, scorn for daring to touch a weapon. Instead, he studied her with something unreadable, a flicker of respect buried beneath the stern lines of his face. "You've got steel," he said finally. "Don't let anyone beat it out of you." Her heart pounded at his words. That night, as she tucked the children into bed, she thought of him not as the stern rancher who had spared them, but as a man who understood survival in ways she had barely begun to fathom. One night, by the fire again, he spoke of his wife, how she died giving birth to their first child, how the child did not survive either. His voice did not falter, but his eyes did not meet hers. Clara listened in silence, knowing some griefs demanded only presence, not words. When he finished, she whispered, "I offered myself to you because I thought there was no other way. Not because I wanted to, not because I believed I was worth wanting." He looked at her then, the firelight glinting in his eyes. "You don't owe me your body. You owe those children your strength. That's all." The words broke something inside her, something brittle and long-starved of kindness. She turned away quickly, but tears slid down her cheeks all the same. Days stretched into weeks, each one measured by watchfires at night and glances over shoulders by day. Pike's gang had not struck yet, but the signs were everywhere. Smoke on the horizon where cabins once stood, cattle tracks cut by horseshoes not belonging to Carter's men, whispers from town of families vanished. Each passing hour wound the tension tighter. One afternoon, Clara ventured into town with Jeb to fetch supplies. She kept her children close, wary of every stranger's eyes. That was when she saw him, Ezekiel Pike himself, broad as a bear, his beard tangled, eyes glinting cruel as a knife. He leaned against a post outside the saloon, his men lounging like wolves in the sun. His gaze locked on Clara, sliding over her like oil. He smiled, slow and deliberate. "Well now," he drawled, loud enough for the street to hear, "ain't you a pretty scrap of mercy, wandering with Carter?" Clara's stomach churned, her hand tightening on Samuel's. She lowered her gaze, praying silence would protect her. Jeb stepped between them, his voice cold as steel. "Keep your tongue, Pike." Pike's grin widened, but his eyes glittered with venom. "Careful, Carter. A man who takes in strays might find his hands too full when wolves come calling." Tension snapped like a drawn bowstring. For a moment, Clara feared blood would spill right there in the street. But Jeb's hand only tightened on his holster, and Pike laughed, raising his hands in mock surrender before swaggering back toward the saloon. Clara exhaled shakily, her body trembling. Jeb guided her and the children back to the wagon without a word, but she saw his jaw set, his silence more dangerous than any shout. That night, Clara lay awake long after the children slept. She could still feel Pike's gaze crawling over her, could still hear his mocking voice. The safety she had found at the ranch now felt fragile, as though the walls themselves would crumble when the wolves came. Jeb walked the perimeter of the ranch until dawn, rifle slung across his shoulder, his eyes never resting. He knew Pike. He knew the man would not stop with threats. The gang would come, and when they did, the Carter Ranch would be the line between survival and ruin. Inside, Clara pressed her children close, her heart pounding in rhythm with the wind rattling the shutters. She had thought hunger was the worst the frontier could bring. But now she understood. Hunger was but the beginning. And as the night deepened, she could not shake the thought that perhaps she had not only saved her children by stumbling into Jeb Carter's world. Perhaps fate had bound her to a battle neither of them could escape. The prairie was too quiet. Not the restful quiet of dawn, nor the tired hush after a day's work, but the brittle silence of something lurking, waiting. The men at Carter Ranch felt it in their bones. Clara felt it too, a chill in her marrow even as the summer heat clung heavy to the night. The children slept bundled in the loft above the main room, their breath soft and steady, unaware that danger prowled just beyond the dark. Jeb Carter sat at the table with his rifle laid across his lap, eyes fixed on the window, though the glass showed nothing but shadow. He had barely spoken all evening, the weight of inevitability pressing down on him. Ezekiel Pike would not be patient forever. Wolves never were. Clara lingered near the fire, sewing needle forgotten in her hand. Her gaze flicked from Jeb to the children above, her heart caught between gratitude for the safety he had given and terror that it could all be torn away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, gravel-thick. "When they come, you take the young uns into the cellar. You don't open that door till it's me calling you." Her chest tightened. "And if it isn't you—" Jeb's eyes lifted to hers, hard as flint. "Then you keep it barred. Don't matter what you hear." The fire cracked. Clara swallowed against the dryness in her throat. "You mean for me to hide while you—" "I mean for you to keep those children alive," he cut in. His tone was firm, but beneath it lay something raw, a plea he did not voice. Before she could answer, a shout rang out from the gate. Then came the flare of torches against the horizon, the thunder of hooves beating earth. Men swarmed out of the bunkhouse, rifles clutched tight, curses rising into the night. Pike had come. Clara gathered her children, carrying the youngest, while the older three clung to her skirts. She hurried them down into the root cellar, her hands shaking as she barred the heavy door. She knelt beside them in the dark, pressing them close as the world above erupted in chaos. Gunfire cracked, sharp and merciless. Horses screamed. Men shouted orders, voices broken by fear and fury. Clara buried her face against her children's hair, whispering prayers she half remembered, words tumbling out with the desperation of a woman begging heaven itself to listen. Above, Jeb stood at the gate with his men, rifle steady as Pike's gang poured forward like a flood. Muzzles flashed, bullets hissed past, dirt leapt in violent bursts. Men fell. Jeb fired again and again, his jaw clenched tight, each shot a reminder of battles long past. Through the smoke and fire, he saw Pike riding tall, his beard wild, his grin savage. Their eyes locked across the field, and in that moment the years peeled away. They were soldiers again, not rancher and outlaw, but brothers in arms turned bitter foes. "Carter!" Pike bellowed, his voice booming like thunder. "You always did hoard what ain't yours. Hand over the woman and the brats, and maybe I'll let your men live." Jeb's answer was a bullet that whistled so close it clipped Pike's hat from his head. The outlaw only laughed, the sound feral. "Then bleed for her, old friend." The fight churned hotter. Bullets ripped through wood, shattered glass. A ranch hand fell beside Jeb with a cry, blood soaking the dirt. Another reeled back, clutching his shoulder. Still they held the line, the ranch yard echoing with the clash of survival. In the cellar, the children whimpered at every thunderous crack. Clara held them tight, but her body shook. Her mind raced with memories of hunger, of her husband's empty promises, of the vow she had made to keep these little ones breathing no matter the cost. She could not sit in the dark while men died above. Her hands found the old rifle propped in the corner, left from harvest days when rodents threatened the storehouse. Her fingers trembled as she grasped it, but her grip hardened as her resolve grew. She kissed each child's head, whispered for them to be brave, then unbarred the cellar door. Smoke burned her eyes as she stepped into the open. The yard was chaos, firelight painting every face in savage relief. She raised the rifle, heart hammering, and fired. The shot struck a man square in the chest, pitching him backward into the dust. Clara gasped, the weight of what she had done slamming into her. But there was no time to falter. Another man charged the porch, she fired again, and he fell. "Clara!" Jeb's voice cut through the din, shocked but fierce. She moved toward him, the rifle clutched tight, her skirts catching in the dirt. For the first time, she fought not as a beggar, not as a widow, but as a mother standing between death and her children. Then Pike came. He dismounted in the yard, shotgun in hand, eyes alight with cruelty. Well, he sneered, striding toward her. The little birds got claws. Clara froze, her rifle empty. Pike's grin widened. "I'll take you now, pretty, and show Carter what comes of stealing what's mine to claim." He lunged, his hand seizing her arm. She cried out, struggling, nails raking his skin. His laugh was foul, hot against her ear. But Jeb was there, slamming into Pike with the force of a charging bull. The two men crashed into the dirt, fists and fury flying. Pike's shotgun clattered away as they grappled, old soldiers locked once more in brutal war. Clara stumbled back, gasping for breath, eyes wide as the men rolled, fists smashing into flesh, blood staining the ground. Pike fought with savage strength, his laughter twisting into growls. Jeb fought with grim determination, each strike fueled by years of grief and the need to protect what he had sworn he would not let die. "You can't win, Carter." Pike snarled, landing a blow that split Jeb's lip. "You're a man already half in the grave." Jeb spat blood, his eyes blazing. "Better half in the grave than crawling in your shadow." Pike drew a knife from his belt, the blade flashing in firelight. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Jeb grappled for his wrist, muscles straining, the knife inching closer to his throat. Desperation surged through Clara. She seized a rock from the dirt, hefted it with both hands, and hurled it with every ounce of strength she had left. The stone struck Pike's temple. He reeled, snarling, and Jeb wrenched free. With a final roar, Jeb drove the knife into Pike's chest. The outlaw's eyes widened, shock breaking across his face. He staggered, gasped, then collapsed into the dust, his life bleeding into the earth. The yard fell eerily still. Pike's men, seeing their leader dead, scattered like jackals into the night. Gunfire ceased. Only the crackle of burning wood and the ragged breathing of survivors filled the air. Clara stood frozen, the rifle limp at her side, staring at the fallen man who had nearly stolen everything. Jeb rose slowly, his chest heaving, blood streaking his brow. His gaze found hers across the yard, and for a moment there was nothing but the raw, unspoken bond forged in fire and blood. She rushed to him, hands trembling as she touched his face. "You're hurt." "I'll live," he muttered, his voice hoarse, though his hand lingered over hers as if to anchor himself. Around them, the ranch lay scarred. Two of Jeb's men lay dead, others groaned in pain. The cattle bawled from their pens, spooked by smoke and noise. Yet the ranch still stood. The children still breathed. Clara pressed her forehead against Jeb's chest, tears spilling free, not of fear, but of release. By dawn, Pike's body had been buried outside the ranch fence, a shallow grave marked only by disturbed earth. The survivors gathered, weary and hollow-eyed. Jeb stood apart, silent, his gaze fixed on the horizon, as if measuring the cost of what had been lost and what had been spared. Clara joined him, her children huddled close. She looked at the man who had given them shelter, who had fought tooth and nail to keep them safe, and saw not only the hardened rancher, but the wounded soul beneath. "You should send us away," she whispered, voice thick with weariness. "We've brought nothing but trouble to your door." Jeb turned to her then, his eyes softened though his body bore the marks of battle. "No," he said simply. "You stay. You and those children. This ranch is yours as much as mine now." Her lips parted, words failing her. He lifted a hand, brushing dirt and ash from her cheek, with surprising gentleness. "You came here starving," he said, "but I saw fire in you even then. That fire saved more lives than mine tonight. Don't you dare think you're a burden." Clara's throat tightened, her heart breaking open under the weight of his words. For the first time in too long, she believed she and her children might truly belong. As the sun rose, spilling gold across the battered ranch, Clara watched her children run through the yard, their laughter startling against the grim silence of the night before. She took Jeb's hand without thinking, fingers entwining with his, not out of debt, but out of something deeper, something forged in hunger, in fear and survival. The narrator's voice rose in the quiet of dawn, reflective and solemn. Out here on the edge of the world, survival was not measured by land or cattle, nor by how many bullets a man could fire. It was measured by the courage to keep going when every breath fought against you, by the strength to hold on to those who depended on you most. Clara may had found that strength. Jeb Carter had remembered his. And together, against hunger, against grief, against the wolves that circled, always, they had found something more enduring than survival. They had found hope. So, what do we take from this tale? Perhaps it's this. The frontier was never just a land to be tamed, but a test of will, of heart, of the unyielding bond between souls who refuse to be broken. And if this story moved you, dear listener, don't forget to share it. Leave your mark as one more voice around the campfire where tales like this live on.